What's up, everyone? We're here for post-game Locked On Bucks, and this was not really a signature game for the Bucks this season. This was not an enjoyable game, I would say, if you're a Bucks fan. The Cavs really run them out of the gym. Milwaukee hadn't played for 3 days. We weren't sure how they were going to come out and play, but it wasn't good. The Cavs looked great, but there is plenty to break down, so let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show daily and also find my work at ESPN. And joining me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, who sent me a message a few minutes ago and said, let me know when you want to get this over with. And I thought, I took that a little bit personally, actually, because I was like, listen, win or lose, this is a fun time when I get to hang out with you, Frank, but maybe the feeling's not mutual. But I will say, just after that, I saw a tweet from Giannis that said, we sucked. We played bad. They made shots. They played good. They played better than us. And then I said, do we even need to podcast today, or can we just leave it at that one Giannis quote?
Yeah, we were talking the other night about like the Bucks are gonna be well rested, and is that a good thing? Like,
Right.
3 days off, like I feel like that's normally kind of recipe for the Bucks coming out looking rusty. And ironically, they started great in terms of shooting, and 6 out of 7 to start the game from 3, and then they finished the game 3 for 25 from 3, whereas the Cavs made just 1 of 5. And it was kind of funny. I mean, they were making all these threes, but they were not up by much in the early going of the first quarter. They do go up by 9 at the end of the first quarter, so you feel like, okay, that's pretty good. But I mean, they were making a bunch of threes, and it kind of felt like, especially with the lack of size. Giannis had kind of a slow start, but it was like, we always talk about like 3-point regression, and usually it's in the context of like the Bucks giving up a ton of threes, and then hopefully it kind of comes back. In this case, they were the ones that started fast, and then by the end it was like, hey, where's that mean regression coming for the Bucks? And I think it's interesting though, because I mean the Cavs end up hitting 10 more threes plus 30, right, nominally in terms of 3-point game. And the points in the paint, the Bucks actually won the points in the paint 46-32. The battle of the boards, both teams were pretty close in terms of the defensive rebound rate. So it's kind of like, it was interesting because it kind of felt like, oh, okay, this is mainly about the 3-point shooting difference and then the turnovers. I mean, Bucks had 19 turnovers, 31 points off those turnovers versus just 13 for the Cavs, 12 points off turnovers. So it felt like that was sort of the story of the game. Bucks just sort of were like sloppy and then just completely stopped making shots. But I thought, in spite of some of the numbers say, as far as the rebounding and some of the interior scoring, it felt like you just really felt the Cavs' size tonight. And it just felt like the Bucks were just constantly, I mean, they tried different things. They eventually were switching stuff. It just felt like the Cavs had size advantages repeatedly over and over. And again, it took a little while for Mobley and Jared Allen. They neither guys had like huge games. But it just felt like the Bucks, this was a game where it felt like missing Brook Lopez was really apparent defensively, in spite of the 3-point shooting, which obviously like Brook can't single-handedly stop. But I think that's why, when you talk about like matchups and kind of how the Bucks size up, that's why I think, even if the 3-point shooting is closer, that's why I would have some concerns about the Bucks and the Cavs in a kind of a 1v1 matchup. Because again, they're a good team. And I think we saw that tonight. Again, Cedi Osman is not going to hit 6 threes and score 22 points most nights, but Kevin Love's been playing great, and he was really good again tonight. He was constantly having mismatches against smaller guys. And again, I mean, this is why the Cavs are now ahead of the Bucks in the standings, right? I mean, we thought this team was going to fade and the Bucks were going to catch up, and right now that hasn't happened.
The size is interesting because they are so unique, and it's worth noting, obviously, that they didn't have Larry Markkinen tonight either, who is another big guy. So they slot in Dean Wade, who in my head is always a guard until I see him out on the floor, and then I realize he's actually a big dude. But you mentioned the 3-point differential, and I think anytime you have 10 fewer threes and it's 45% up against 28%, you are going to struggle. But it sounds like you just think in general the size discrepancy in this matchup, it would be a concern moving forward. So I guess the question is, do you think that the Bucks have a size problem across the board, across a number of matchups, or it's kind of specific to the Cavs because they are so unique?
I mean, I think we talked about it like a week ago or whenever it was, right? Like, I think the Bucks have a lacking Brook Lopez problem.
Yes.
So it's not just purely like a just get a big guy problem. I mean, I think again, anytime the Bucks lose, people are gonna talk about like, Boogie Cousins as though he's kind of like the savior. I mean, I don't think Boogie was gonna be the answer to the Bucks 3-point defense problems tonight. But just the fact that they're scoring depth, they've had a lot of nights where they get basically nothing from the bench. Tonight was another night. Dante had a pretty uneven game, 4 out of 11, 9 points. That was basically it from the bench. Jordan Nwora had 4 points on 5 shots, and Semi Ojeleye had a dunk with 10 seconds left that was uncontested. That was your bench contributions. George Hill didn't score a point after his really improved play over the weekend. He didn't score a point in 23 minutes. Rodney Hood had a token appearance. Obviously they were missing Wes Matthews, and Pat Connaughton scored 11 points on 7 shots. So I mean, I think they do have just a general size problem that is mostly a defensive problem. I don't think they need Brook Lopez or Boogie Cousins or any specific big guy to score points. That there's no excuse for not scoring points, I think. I think it's more about sort of just, again, the defensive end, and I think especially it felt like I'd be curious to see kind of the stats like throughout the game, like after 3 quarters, like where some of the rebounding, some of those things were, because like Giannis, for instance, had 3 rebounds and 3 assists in his first 6 minutes. He didn't have another assist the entire game, mainly because the Bucks couldn't make a jump shot, and so him kicking out led to nothing. But he also didn't have a rebound for 2 full quarters of play, and part of that was the Cavs just didn't miss shots. But again, I think you just felt it, the Cavs size. There were a lot of long rebounds, which again, like, maybe just being bigger doesn't necessarily help you with like just these kind of long rebounds off long misses. But yeah, I mean, I think again, just the lack of size, I think does hurt a bit. And I think when you're in shooting slumps as well, one thing the Bucks have been able to do in past years is when they shoot poorly, they can still win games because, starting with Giannis, they have obviously that interior presence. And, again, not that Brook was, popping up to score 20 points with any regularity. Bobby Portis had a very nice statistical night tonight, 22 points on 15 shots. So, I mean, you got, I think, what you would hope for from especially Bobby and to an extent, Chris Middleton as well, 21 points on 15 shots. But other than that, Giannis kind of did his Giannis thing, got to the line 12 times in the second half, 26 on 13 shots. It's pretty good efficiency, but 7 turnovers. And again, I just think on both ends, there were just, I think, times where when the Cavs weren't just burying 3-pointers, they made some big plays inside. Giannis got dunked on by Evan Mobley at one point. It just felt like at times, like, the Cavs were able to get mismatches, and when that happened inside, Mobley and Allen were able to take advantage, even if they didn't have big games. So I think they do need some size from somewhere. And again, it doesn't even necessarily need to be a center, but just like somebody who's like, if they had somebody who was like 6'9", 240, like another power forward that had some strength and could help, just bring a little bit more physicality. I think that would help in a matchup like this. And again, we saw last year, obviously they were able to kind of go small late in games to good effect at times, but again, PJ Tucker played bigger than his size. Wes Matthews is the closest thing you'd kind of have to that, but Wes, again, sizes down better than PJ, but I don't think he sizes up as well as PJ. And the big thing is obviously, you're not playing Brook Lopez 25, 30 minutes a game. And obviously that just makes you much smaller and just gives you, it just takes away a lot of, I think, their, the identity that they had last year, and especially in the playoffs. I mean, they shot horribly throughout the playoffs, but the physicality, the size on both ends was something that they could really bring to bear. And I think this year it's still a bit of a struggle kind of figuring out, like, well, when you don't have that physicality, how do you, what is your identity as a team? And I think defensively it's much harder, most notably. But I think even offensively, like on nights like tonight where you had 3 guys contributing and pretty much nobody else, the fact that you can't really rely on kind of crashing the boards and kind of getting back into it that way, that's just kind of one less thing that you can rely on.
All right, let's talk about Bet Online, our sponsors of the podcast. They are wishing you a happy new betting year as we continue the march towards the playoffs and beyond. Bet Online remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. It is a new year, and there's a new updated desktop and mobile website that you can sign up today and receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code Locked On to get started there, whether it's football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. I do have to mention our NBA trade deadline show, which is going to be coming up. Keep an eye on that across the Locked On Podcast Network. You'll be getting live reactions and analysis of trades that go down February 10. So it's right around the corner here, and I didn't mention it off the top, but we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every day, even after disappointing losses like this. We really appreciate it. I guess, and I don't know whether now's the time to get into trade stuff. I know we've had a bunch of people asking us about potential trade options, buyout options. I know we're going to get into it over the next couple of weeks, but when you were talking about the Bucks being a physical team, and it's kind of interesting because I do think that if you think about the Bucks in general and you look at Giannis and you say, okay, one of the most unstoppable players in transition, you think to yourself, well, the Bucks, and you hear it all the time with announcers, and most of the time it's national announcers that perhaps aren't watching every single Bucks game, but they'll say, well, if the pace is up, this is going to suit the Bucks. This is what the Bucks want to do. And to an extent, I get it, because if Giannis is in open space, he is going to be unstoppable. They like to shoot the threes. But Cleveland's similar to Charlotte, and again, I compared them to Charlotte yesterday, but similar to Charlotte, they're young, and I thought that the pace got so frenetic today that the Bucks were just completely out of whack. And you had someone like Darius Garland, who half the time looked like he could barely move, and then 2 seconds later, he's cooking Drew Holiday on the perimeter. They were pushing the ball. They were getting wide open looks, particularly in transition. I don't know whether that pace, that concerns me, Frank, when I'm watching a younger team that's super athletic, in addition to the size that you already mentioned. I didn't think that suited the Bucks. And I thought that at times, particularly in the second quarter, where the Bucks really lost control of the game in the second quarter, where the Cavs took over, I thought the Bucks needed to try and settle it down a little bit and slow it down, because I didn't think the up and down pace of the game was suiting them.
Yeah, I mean, so cleaning the glass has a metric, like basically like a points added through transition. Because I mean, that's one thing too, right? I mean, like a lot of like playing in transition is just getting more shots quickly.
Yeah.
And even if you're not super efficient in transition relative to other teams, transition just tends to be much more efficient because you're getting layups, open threes, things like that, right? So you get more of those, even if you're not, the highest efficiency, just getting a lot can help you. So I mean, for context, the last 3 years under Bud, Bucks were 3rd, 11th, and 8th in that category, kind of those like points added by transition points added per 100 possessions. This year they're 25th, and basically again, always like roughly around like 3-ish points per 100 they added through transition above kind of what you'd normally expect. This year they're at 1.7, and obviously by the fact they're 25th, that's bad. Versus defensively this year, they're still very good. They were 3rd last year, they're 4th this year, and it's actually 1.7, so basically pretty much exactly the same. So essentially all of their good transition defense this year has been offset by their bad transition offense. But yeah, I mean, and it's kind of hard to say, right? I mean, it's like on a night like this where, you're not getting a lot of second chances and you're just missing tons and tons of 3-point shots, one shot, empty possessions when teams are running off that. And perhaps most notably, I mean, when you have a ton of turnovers, yeah, I mean, a fast pace is not going to help you, right? If you're turning the ball over a lot more than your opponent, if you're missing a lot more than your opponent, a fast pace is going to be bad because the opponent's going to be getting the ball and able to run in better scenarios than you are. I was surprised, to be honest, that the fast break points can somewhat be a little deceiving because of the way they measure it. But only 5 fast break points for the Cavs tonight, which just doesn't seem possible. But again, I think what it felt like, especially in the second half, again, the Bucks, in part because of just the way they're constructed right now. If it's not Giannis attacking the rim, Drew Holiday was super quiet today. Normally, Drew is a guy that can work his way to the basket for points closer to the rim. Tonight, he didn't have any success doing that. I mean, he got completely outplayed by Darius Garland, a guy he's competing for all-star candidacy with. And I thought, again, like, they just sort of were like, all right, we're just going to keep hucking threes. And obviously, 3 out of 25, right? After that fast start, that was just not the answer. And certainly the offense in the last 3 quarters, I mean, 35 in the first quarter and then 22, 20, and 22. I mean, just bad offense. And the defense obviously didn't perform a whole lot better, especially with just the 3-point shooting. So yeah, I mean, again, I think, the Bucks can play fast when, again, like it sort of suits Giannis. I think that's when, transition can suit them well. They're still a good defensive team, but certainly numbers suggest that they just have not been as effective offensively this year. And I think it's an interesting question why, right? Because, I mean, Brook Lopez being hurt shouldn't hurt your ability to be good in transition, right? I mean, Bobby Portis runs the floor hard. I think I'd probably have to dig into the numbers a little more just to see like why the transition offense is worse, because you would certainly think that playing smaller would help you in that regard.
Yeah, and maybe it's just shooting poorly on threes on those possessions this year. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you talk about taking early shots, and maybe that's the better way to put it. It just felt like it was a little bit out of control tonight when that pace got up. By the way, Giannis kind of got dunked on tonight, which is unfortunate. But Bobby Portis had a pretty good dunk down the other end. I just don't understand why we can't just let these guys, say something after a big dunk, Frank. Why are we dishing out the text? I saw someone tweeted that Bobby Portis said, "and one MFer." And you know what? We're all adults. It's fine. You're allowed to say that. It's not like... So the thing that was so comical about this technical foul to me was the fact that the ref called it. And then he started
running at him.
I'm like, dude, he's walking away from you. Like, what do you think is about to happen? Like, it was just such a ref show. I'm sick of it. Let these guys... It was a cool dunk. He's allowed to say "and one MFR," in my opinion.
Well, I mean, if you're the ref and you think he's calling you a mother effer, then, you get what you pay for. Plus the game was starting to get away from the Bucks a little bit at that point. And so I think it was sort of a frustration play from Bobby. And, unfortunately kind of was what it was, but
he's racking up a few texts in recent times.
It's kind of funny because it's like, it's funny how often, and I think one of them, at least they realized, who was that with? Who was it that he kind of was jawing with, but that it was like friendly and the two guys, was it like Kelly Oubre?
Yeah,
the Hornets game or something? I don't know. But, they were like, they both then like went to the ref and were like, hey, we're just having fun. And I think they then didn't call attack. But yeah, Bobby's just kind of funny like that. He's either like in your face, like really jawing, or slapping guys on the ass and saying good job for, finishing on me or whatever. So he's we always talk about Giannis being difficult to officiate. Bobby can be a little difficult to officiate because his intensity is sometimes manifests itself in ways where you think it's going to be, like he's trying to get into it with a guy and he's actually just sort of having some good natured back and forth. But yeah, I don't know if that was really the case with that dunk on Cedi Osman. It wasn't like he was, saying like, hey, Cedi, you're my boy. Yeah, I mean, I think that was just sort of indicative of sort of how the game was trending at that point.
What does the slap on the ass allow you to get away with? And I ask that because he had a pretty hard foul on Evan Mobley early in this game. And I was like, okay, that was a pretty, it was an intentional foul. He swung the arm relatively hard. And then obviously Evan Mobley's the rookie. He's not really going to do anything about it when he turns around and sees Bobby Portis staring at him, which he was. But then Bobby Portis gave him a slap on the ass, and I was like, yeah, I can do whatever I want to you, but if I give you a slap on the ass, it's all okay. Does that allow you to Maybe I'm not suggesting Grayson Allen should have given Caruso a slap on the ass. I don't think that would have helped his cause, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, hey, maybe it works on a basketball floor. I would not encourage people to try it in not in an office setting if you're trying to diffuse something. But yeah, I don't know. I have no other thoughts on Bobby's friendly jawing and what he can and can't get away with.
Okay, Eric name dropped the story this morning. Our friend over at The Athletic, which is the trade deadline. Again, we'll get into this. I'm sure there'll be rumors. There will be reports in the lead up to the trade deadline. Is there any veteran player out on the market, given the conversation we had earlier in this podcast, that you have your eyes on? So some of the guys that Eric mentioned, obviously Robin Lopez. We may have mentioned him once or twice across this podcast in recent months. Thad Young was another guy that was there. Is there anyone out there that you think is the perfect fit, given what we saw tonight and potentially? We don't know. I mean, I just don't know whether this team can go through without some sort of Brook Lopez insurance. It feels like that would be potentially a mistake. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've found interesting is like they haven't even like tried to go like the 10-day route on anybody.
Yeah.
For big guy minutes. And I mean, I kind of get like the idea that like, I mean, just throwing any 6'10", 6'11" guy, like, like it's not like any 6'10", 11 guy off the street is gonna help you. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, it's fair to second guess the Boogie decision just as far as what it's meant on the floor. Again, if Bud wanted Boogie, I think Bud would have Boogie still on this team. Read that what you will. But yeah, it's a little interesting that they haven't even tried to do anything. Because I mean, like I mean, they need another big guy. Like having Pat Connaughton try to defend, 4s and 5s as part of the second unit every night. I mean, that just doesn't work. And I mean, tonight, like Kevin Love was constantly being guarded by smaller guys. And again, it's not like Kevin Love was just, putting little guys under the rim or something like that, right? I mean, he was pretty much it was pretty much all jump shots for him. But even so, he didn't have a hard time shooting over guys either. And I think we're kind of seeing it. Like it's just kind of harder to figure out like kind of what the thesis on this team is. Like how are they going to be an elite team come the playoffs? I mean, again, if it doesn't involve Brook Lopez, I don't think they are going to be an elite team in the playoffs. I think it's just too much to overcome. It's my 2 cents. It doesn't mean you can't win a playoff series, and I don't know, could you win 2 playoff series? Maybe. But I think, if getting back to your question as far as like, who else is out there? I mean, there was the article like maybe a week ago about Marc Gasol still being, I think, leaving the door open for a potential return to the NBA. And, it's interesting looking at his numbers with the Lakers last year. I mean, it's not like he was like washed with the Lakers. I think, I think history showed that the way that they sort of kicked him to the curb in favor of Andre Drummond was not really something that ultimately was very well thought through, and maybe
justifiably angry, I think.
Perhaps foreshadowing for the Lakers' decision making over the past year more generally. So that's an interesting one. And again, Mark is in the latter half of his 30s as well. He is not a savior. He is not just going to give you exactly what Brook Lopez gave you. If he was available right now to come over, I would say, Mark, get your ass over here. And I would, again, not having seen Mark play basketball here, he's been playing in Spain, I believe. So it's not like he's like just been hanging out on the couch. But again, he's also such a smart guy. I mean, Marc Gasol could kind of roll out of bed and probably give you 10 decent minutes and not really hurt you. And he's so cerebral on both ends as well, which I think is important. So yeah, I mean, just as far as like somebody that, is just available and that you wouldn't have to trade for, because I think that's the hard part is, and Eric put out his sort of trade preview. I mean, again, so much of this comes down to Brook Lopez's health, right? Like, again, we see him in these all access videos. It was again this week. He was wearing shoes this time. I think he won his free throw contest in the little group that he was in. So he's doing some stuff on a basketball court. But if he's back in a month, I mean, is that why the Bucks are not more interested in kind of trying to find some help at the center spot? I hope so. I would love it if the reason they're not looking for help is because Brook Lopez is going to be back in the not so distant future. But again, anytime you have a back problem, it's just hard to make any assumptions, right? I mean, they thought he was going to come back much earlier this season, and then he ended up needing surgery. So, but I think if they think they're going to get Brook back, I just don't see them like cashing in like Dante, who's basically the only real trade chip they have. I don't really see them cashing in kind of their depth, what little depth they might have there in the backcourt beyond the usual guys, in order to get another center who, I mean, we saw it a couple years ago. I mean, Robin Lopez didn't play past, I think, the Magic series in the year that he was with the Bucks. I mean, he was benched. Neither Rolo nor Ersan played at all, I think, against the Heat that year. And, it makes sense. We saw it last year. They won a championship by playing just Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Giannis, and, if you want to call PJ Tucker the fourth big there. So yeah, I mean, it's just like, are you going to use the assets you have to get a big who maybe isn't even like going to play if Brook comes back? It doesn't really seem like the move. But by the same token, the fact that they're not trying to sign anybody off the street, suggests, hey, maybe they are at least keeping an eye open on that, or keeping their options open, so long as the Brook situation remains unresolved, right? I mean, we've seen, I know we had a question on Twitter about like, oh, would you look at like Mo Bamba? And again, it's just kind of like, I mean, all right, you trade for Mo Bamba. Well, if Brook comes back, then does Mo Bamba play like at all? I mean, last time we saw him, he was getting like thrown around by a rag doll by Joel Embiid. It's not like he's just like the pure answer. He's a really interesting long-term prospect. But I don't know that he's, kind of the magic answer there. And you still have Brook Lopez owed $13 million next year. So, if you're getting a guy who you have to then sign to a contract, then, are you suddenly going to spend a lot of your precious luxury tax dollars on, two centers, only one of which you maybe really need? Again, I just probably don't see that. And I think the other thing too with Dante is, I mean, they have 2 point guards, and if Drew or George Hill gets hurt, and we've seen how hard it is to kind of paper over the lack of ball handlers, and Dante is not a point guard, obviously, but if you're going to have another guy other than Chris and Giannis, like just bring the ball up and just be able to kind of like be that connector, kind of at least pass the ball a little bit, Dante can at least provide you some depth there. So I don't know. I just don't really see a big trade coming. I think they're probably going to more or less stick with mostly what they have. And then I think, again, I mean, John Horst has always made some moves around the deadline. So I think there's something missing, but I just don't know that there's a real obvious play here. And again, especially with buyouts, like if Thad Young's a potential buyout guy, if Rolo's a potential buyout guy, that's another reason not to go off and try to use, trade assets to try to make an addition. But I don't know. I mean, what's your expectation? Do you foresee like activity around the deadline? Do you think it's gonna be quiet? What do you think is the tack they're taking?
Well, I tend to agree with you that the Bucks don't really have too many chips they can move into the table, but I must admit, I didn't think that they had the adequate suppliers to trade for PJ Tucker last year anyway. So, I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean, that was a shocking trade for me at the time. As you sort of pointed to, I mean, John Horst has not been shy. I feel like he's going to do something. Like, I would be surprised if basically the 14 guys that they're basically playing, whatever, are the only guys on the roster come the playoffs. Again, I think that if there was concern about Brook Lopez, as you pointed to, then maybe they would go for a guy like Robin. If the Magic were going to buy out Robin Lopez, though, because I was always looking at that as a potential trade, and I understand your point. If you think he's going to be a backup big man, then you're probably not trading for him. But wouldn't that have to be just John Hammond doing a favor for the Bucks? Yeah, we're going to buy out Robin Lopez. You can have him. Robin would say, I'm going to sign with the Bucks and then come back. I feel like it was Johnny Hammond would have to be just doing the Bucks a favor there. similar with Pop with Thad Young.
I mean, I guess the question is, Robin doesn't make nearly as much money. Thad Young is just hard to trade for because of the salary he makes. I think he's like around 14 million bucks. So it's just like, all right, he basically hasn't played this year. Is a contender going to be able to go and match salary? And obviously it would likely presumably be expiring salary, and then throw in what, I think Thad Young is worth certainly like at least probably a second round pick. I don't think a first round pick at this point, given his age, but again, like, is a deal actually going to get done there? Are you going to cobble together a bunch of money? Do you have a bunch of money laying around that you can make a trade like that? I don't know. And then I think with Rolo, it's a fair question. Like, is he just doing him a solid? But let's be honest. The reason they signed him was to be kind of like a culture setting veteran type of guy. I think he knew, they had Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba, like that there was a chance he's not going to be part of, the every night rotation, and they want to get those guys minutes. So you could say, well, yeah, it's just sort of doing the Bucks a solid if he were to be bought out and come to Milwaukee. But I think it's also like, it's kind of funny. Like, Rolo doesn't strike me as a guy who I feel like Rolo would just be fine, like hanging out in Orlando.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think he cares?
Like,
do you think
I don't think Rolo cares that much about like, Rolo does not care. He just doesn't strike me as a guy who's like chasing a ring. Right. No. But I think the Bucks are kind of unique because, obviously he is well liked here. They brought they brought Wes back. They brought George back. It's very similar to the team that he was on 2 years ago. His buddies from his wrestling routines. So I could certainly see it as a nice fit that might be appealing to him. And of course, at the end of the day, especially if it's done because Brook is done for the year, or like a huge question mark, or only going to be able to play limited minutes, I'm sure the idea of being able to just come in and play most nights for a team that has title ambitions, like, it's got to be at least somewhat appealing, even if, there isn't a Disney theme park in the state of Wisconsin. So I think that would be appealing. But again, it's the same question, right? Like, well, is there a team that is going to throw a matching salary and a second round pick at the Magic for Robin Lopez? It's possible, I don't know who that is. Again, I would say, like, unless Brook Lopez is just like done and there's no other way to get, and Marc Gasol isn't walking through that door, or there's no other options, I would be loath to, send kind of, assets to the Magic in order to get Robin. But yeah, that's kind of the hard part about prognosticating with some of these guys that are like useful players but may just be buyouts, right? Marvin Williams is probably not that dissimilar from Thad. Because Marvin, I think, also had like a pretty decent sized contract when he got bought out by the Hornets, a couple years back. But it was sort of to do him a solid because the Hornets weren't really in the playoff race or whatever. So yeah, obviously the Magic are nowhere near a playoff race. So, who knows? There may have been an understanding with him as well that, if he did his Robin Lopez thing for 2/3 of the season, then, they would do him a solid and let him go sign with a team that had a better chance to do something in the playoffs.
Marvin Williams. I wonder what he's up to. We have not heard from him since he surprised us all by going into retirement. I hope you are.
Ursan's available. We know Ursan's available.
Yeah, Ursan's.
I don't think Ursan's the answer to the Bucks challenges right now either. But he is at least 6 feet 10 inches tall, so that's at least something.
What happens if Robin Lopez says, "I'm only signing if you bring back Ursan, so we can have the full band back together"?
It's remarkable how similar that roster would be if they did that. But yeah, it's kind of funny. And I think I think it was a week ago, Willie Cauley-Stein got released when the Mavericks cut him and signed Marquise Chris to a full year contract. It's kind of funny because it's like, I think somebody asked me about him. I let's just say culturally, I don't think Willie is really a Bucks type of player. The other thing too is it's like, mean, the Bucks just like haven't brought in guys that can't shoot really, like during the Bud era. As far as like non-centers, or sorry, as far as like centers that might have to play around Giannis. Like, I mean, even Rolo and John Henson, who were there the first that a couple of years back. I mean, Henson there in the first year of Bud. I mean, he was shooting threes. He actually shot it pretty well before he was traded. So I don't know. That's kind of one of those things. Like, again, I'm not a Willie Cauley-Stein fan, but that's the kind of guy where it's like, if you offered him a 10-day deal just to get a look at him, right? Like, I would think Willie Cauley-Stein would take a 10-day deal at this point. And again, like, worst case scenario, he's not a good fit, but he's at least a guy who's somewhat big and can bring some physicality and potentially like at least give you a little bit more, defense from the center position. So I don't know, but it's just, I think on nights like this where, Drew, when the big three are not all very good, the bench has obviously had issues, especially with some of the depth challenges, some of the injury stuff. So, yeah, not a lot of margin for error when they're not shooting well.
Willie Cauley-Stein? I think he would. I think he would. I think he
Trilly,
would.
didn't he? Did he legally change his name to like Trilly Cauley-Stein or something like that? Didn't he do something weird like that, or he made that his middle name, like Trilly his middle name or something like that? I don't know.
I don't know. That's kind of strange. I might be off him. All right. Make sure you check out the Locked On Bets podcast with your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. They'll have you covered with all the info you need there if you're into that type of thing. But let's wrap it up. Who would have thought 36 minutes and counting on a podcast where there wasn't really that much to talk about? Like Giannis said, the Bucks suck tonight. Hopefully they won't suck.
They suck. They got their asses beat. Yeah.
They did. They're 30-20 on the season. They're 5th in the conference now, which is troubling. If you
barely hanging on over the Sixers, who've been playing much better lately.
The good news is, well, it's good and bad news. Their next game is on national TV against the Knicks. That's good because the Bucks most of the time play well. Unfortunately, they're playing the Knicks, who are a very average team, which means the Bucks typically play average. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with this game. That's on Friday night.
When was remember that Friday night game they had against the Knicks at home that they like had a huge lead and then they got the doors blown off in the second half? Was that last year? That wasn't this year, was it? I can't even remember. I know they lost a game to the Knicks this year, right? And I can't even remember when it was this game that I'm thinking of. Can you recall this game I'm thinking of? It was like I think it was a Friday night game, and they had a big early lead, and then they just kind of keeled over the rest of the game and lost. This is bad radio that I can't remember.
I think it was this season. I think it was this season.
Yeah.
Sounds
Man, that was so long ago.
Sounds like this season's type of behavior. Anyway, Camille will be back on the podcast tomorrow. She's always good to chat to, as you guys know. Frank, we're going to get Camille on a post-game pod, by the way. We'll tee that up with the three of us at some point moving forward here, but we will leave it there for now.
She's a good luck charm. Remember last time we did it? It was for that Laker game. Remember those good times when Giannis annihilated Anthony Davis? That was nice.
That's why you got to be careful. You don't want to break the streak. You want to keep the streak alive with Camille. But anyway, I'm wrapping it up, Frank. For Frank, myself, that'll do us for today. I'll catch you tomorrow with Camille, and let us know in the comments what player you want, whether it's buyout or trade, and we'll discuss as the trade deadline gets near. We'll catch you guys tomorrow.